Walt, this week we hit the road and we went to Austin in search of Robotaxi Unsupervised. And to the audience, we found it. We went for a ride. When Walt and I were busy doing field work around Austin, Uber had the press machine going bing, 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 firing off press releases. While they were doing that, Lucid hosted Investor Day. But Walt, let's start with our fantastically awesome trip. And a huge shout out to you and Rich and the team at Lightshed. Fantastic dinner. Thank you very much. What did you think of our trip to Austin?
Grayson, there must be something about Austin, because one of my favorite past podcast clips is when you said, "We found you," when we were driving by that big Waymo depot for Waymo. So I love the sound of "we found it," and we've got a lot more things to find in 2026. And I think we did find some other things in Austin, which we will get to later. But let's start with unsupervised. Took about a dozen rides, which we'll talk about those in a second. But let's we finally got one. It was like we were right about to end the day before we moved on to our first meeting. So it took a while. The experience was felt the same, and I think we're one of the few. Although I will say this, a lot of people use, including us, the RoboTracker app, which was a great job. That's a great app to have. But I didn't log any of my rides into the RoboTracker app, nor did I ride this unsupervised. And I just wonder, while there's a lot of investors, I think broadly, that are using this thing, that, it's maybe not capturing all the data because you're requiring people to actually plug this in. But back to the actual news, which is, look, the unsupervised ride was great. And, as a result, the route on it was a bit circuitous in locations. I thought at one point it was trying to avoid, certain turns, but then the weird turn it made actually made it more difficult for itself to do an unprotected left. What were your impressions of the unsupervised ride?
It was the moment of joy that we had in the coffee shop, and we're having the cup of coffee waiting for it. And we did use the Robotaxi tracker app. You said, "Whoa, we got it." And then you and I are going back and forth. Is it going to be? Is it not going to be? And then when we saw this moment of glory, unsupervised, rolling up, we high-fived each other, made a video, which we'll play for you now.
Well, Grayson.
Walt, what do you think?
Our chariot has finally arrived. Let's hop in.
We did it. No safety attendant.
Welcome, Grayson, to your unsupervised.
Okay, Walt, it is our first unsupervised FSD. You ready to start the ride?
I'm ready to start the ride.
Let's do it. Walt, we're back in Austin, roughly 6 months later, and lo and behold, we got unsupervised. There's nobody in the front. We're gonna show you here, look. Nobody's in the front. What do you think? What have you noticed?
Well, the fact that we came here to do some primary research, and we obviously have seen that unsupervised is operational. Taking plenty of supervised rides today, but clearly unsupervised is operational in Austin.
Unsupervised is operational, and the routing's been a little different versus supervised, but this is awesome overall.
Yeah, I mean, it feels the same. It feels comfortable speed-wise. It's not any slower, but you're right, routing's a bit different. Well, look, the Tesla in front of us clearly is Robotaxi. It just squirted its back camera. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. The Tesla ride is relatively consistent, I guess, no matter whether you're in FSD or in the Robotaxis, with or without the safety driver, or excuse me, the attendant.
I do not have my inspector hat on, but I will honorary put my hat on. I noticed something on our ride. There's no Mad Max, there's no hurry, there's just self-driving mode in unsupervised. That's interesting.
That is true, because we've been noticing that it's on standard mode, and we've been wishing for the supervised rides that it might be flipping to, Mad Max or hurry, but this one you don't even see it, but it feels like it's basically doing standard.
It feels great though. It's really a smooth experience, and you really can't tell the difference if there's a human the passenger seat or not.
Do you see any chase car behind us?
No, let's see. For the audience, look. No chase car. No chase car.
Autonomy markets out on the road doing the primary work.
We're doing the work.
So we were able to get in one. It didn't take us 50 whatever rides like it took our poor friend David.
Not 100 rides.
Not 100 rides. We did have to take plenty of rides to get in here, but we're completing our first unsupervised Robotaxi. Hopefully they continue to expand quickly.
They continue to expand quickly, and every Saturday, Walt and I will be here to bring you the latest in autonomy markets, including field work live from the field. It was great. It was so much fun to be in there. I remember that one point we thought it wasn't going to make an unprotected left, and then it did make an unprotected left, and it worked flawlessly. And you and I noticed from our rides with you want to call it the supervised, with the safety attendant could not have been in there, and it would have been the same experience. It was fun, is what I'll say. It was fun, and I'm really thankful that we did it together.
And we're one of I think the few, but hopefully that changes, because it's been several months now that we want more people to get it, and maybe we'll get some more feedback at South by Southwest, which is just starting now. I know our good friend David Moss is out there. I think he may have already gotten an unsupervised ride, or I think there was someone else I was following on Twitter. So hopefully we'll get more data points that way. But let's talk about the other dozen rides, because the experience there, I think, for me, felt more conservative than the last time we were there, including the fact that we had situations where the car basically just stopped and we had a call for support. Now, what's interesting to me is the car, when it stops and it's in a situation that it doesn't want to handle, can't handle, however you want to describe it, because it's being, in my view, too cautious, it doesn't automatically go to the remote person. You literally have to hit the button in order for that to happen. And the remote, the person in the safety attendant isn't the one that hits the button. You have to hit the button. And when that happens, the person basically drives you out of the situation and you go back to where it was. In the case that we had, there was actually two. One, it was like basically many lanes of traffic, and it could have turned into a right turn lane only. But I think there was so much traffic, it was just too hesitant to go out there. Part of the reason is this thing's on standard mode and not on Mad Max mode. I think that's part of the challenge here. But also maybe there's an issue where as they kind of modify the software, just like we've seen with FSD, when it goes to sometimes it gets overly safe, like 14.1, and then by 14.2 or 14.3, or maybe that was at 13.1 to 13.2, 13.3, it gets safe, and then it tweaks back to not so safe. What was some of the feedback that you had from the dozen or so rides that we had where the safety attendant was in that passenger seat?
It was a lot more cautious, in my opinion, and it's my assumption that it is running an advanced version of FSD. And to us, the tell sign will be, Walt, when we get our update, does our cars at home, do they get more cautious? That'll be something interesting to watch. Very cautious, not overly confident as the systems that we use. Perhaps there's a fork, or as I said, it's an advanced version and they're working out a bug. The routing was a little odd. The ride was smooth outside of Austin. I'm sorry. You've got some bumpy roads. Nothing the Tesla suspension can do for that. You get some bumpy roads. Very cautious. Seems that I'll use the child term, the training wheels were getting ready to come off. We felt like we saw the one Robotaxi you and I went in unsupervised. It felt like they were getting ready to expand that, where the training wheels were coming off. So that was my overall takeaway from it.
You used the term very cautious twice. I'm so tired, I can't remember. Maybe I said very cautious. I wouldn't say it was very cautious, right? It doesn't feel like you were in chill mode. It was just more cautious than what it was the prior time we were there, and maybe what we're used to with the FSD. So I think you kind of overemphasized very cautious. But the bottom line is, like, the last time we were there, our wait times were shorter. We didn't have any of these situations where there was a quote unquote intervention, or where we had to dial out. And this time we did. And in part, and it wasn't a situation where the car was doing something dangerous and stopped. It just didn't want to take what would have been a more aggressive move in order to continue the ride. In addition to that, there were drop-off issues, and I got a sense that this is kind of the thing that's holding them back, because the remote person was like, look, if the drop off or not the person that was sitting in the passenger seat, like, don't forget to, tell the app about the drop off issues. So I'm guessing that part of, getting to the point where they're going to roll out more of the unsupervised is cleaning up some of the drop off issues. Maybe, and again, this is just speculation, that also has to do with the circuitous routes, so that if you go around the long way, you can drop off on the right side of the road as opposed to having to do a U-turn in the middle of a road, right? Because at one point I was dropped off across the road from where my destination is. So I think, and there's been, I think, some chatter about this before, but my guess is that might be some of the issues that they're dealing with before they can move to the next step.
I know this is not highly scalable, but there is talk, and when I served in the government role, there was talks about this, of dedicated drop-off and pickup zones, if you want to call dedicated drop-off lanes. So the hotel where we have, perhaps the hotel uploads something to Tesla into Waymo, and there's a dedicated loading zone there. When I was out in Palo Alto 2 weeks ago, certain places I went to had dedicated drop-off and pickup zones. I know it's very hard to scale, but I think at some point, if you want to say major tourist destinations, which we're seeing now at Universal Studios, you'll have dedicated lanes, but how that's going to scale, I don't know, but I think it's something that has to be overcome, not just Tesla, but industry-wide, to this truly become mainstream adoptable.
Now, I have gotten questions about, like, what's it like? How much are they running? Are they still running? I mean, again, we got a unsupervised ride. It was one out of basically a dozen rides. Noted that if you're relying on the RoboTracker app, with, again, no, I'm not trying to salt that. It's a great thing that we use, but there's probably a lot of rides that are not getting registered. Certainly our dozen rides weren't getting registered into the app. Just visibly, though, we saw, and I thought, a lot more Teslas, Robotaxis on the road. In addition to that, we saw, were oftentimes red, but clearly Robotaxis with no logo, with people in them, either driving, well, mostly driving. We found a location. There's a Whataburger on, I forget which street, that we always seem to see them hanging out. I don't know if they've got a special deal for Tesla employees at the Whataburger, but we saw a lot of them there. But there's just, look, there are a lot of Tesla employees on the road testing this product. So for people to say, like, oh, or for some of the questions that I sometimes get are like, are they even on the road? Absolutely, because we saw a bunch of them.
The inspector hat's on, because you and I were waiting to get picked up in a Robotaxi at the Whataburger. I mean, they must have good hamburgers. We kept seeing Tesla after Tesla, and we're trying to say, okay, is it Tesla employee? But the inspector hat went on, and I said, Walt needs an honorary hat. And so we went and saw, what did we see? We saw the cleaner in the back camera, and we saw Tesla employee badges. So we're able to confirm that there. What we also noticed when we were in Austin, there is a lot more testing / validation vehicles going around that's been reported. So to me, from what we saw on the ground, this is Tesla's getting ready to scale quickly. Was it slowly, faster, or then all suddenly at once? It appears that they're putting that infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I mean, look, and to put it in context, it's definitely not as many of the Waymos that we saw there, although frankly, I thought there was less Waymos we saw this time than the last time, which kind of maybe supports the thesis that we had months ago that maybe Waymo was flooding the market right when Tesla was launching to really drive home what they could deliver. So there's tons of Waymos, a lot of them empty, a lot of them dirty. We'll get to that later in terms of how Uber allocates rides to the Waymos. But the Teslas there were a lot. And I think, again, you can put your Inspector Clouseau hat on again, because, we also were able to see a large Tesla depot that much larger than what we saw with Waymo. And Waymo, as a reminder, is the company that was servicing the Waymo cars that are there. And like just a massive supply from Cybercabs to Cybertrucks to Model Ys. Just a very big presence, again, to the point you were just making, that, prepping and having the volumes ready, but just waiting for that kind of switch to happen where they're happy enough with where the technology is. And again, you can rewind the podcast if you want. There are clearly many issues that they're still hashing through until they can flip that switch. But when they do, I would suspect that you're going to see a lot of these cars hit the road all at once.
The amount of vehicles that we saw at the Tesla depot was significant. You're right. Cybercabs, Cybertrucks, Model Ys, very, very large amount of vehicles. That's one thing. But what did we uncover when we put our inspector hats on? An abundance of energy. That's right. This location has an abundance of energy. So you have the vehicles and the energy to charge them. They're putting the pieces together.
Absolutely. And you know, it just brings up the question, what are they really waiting for? I thought it was the drop-offs. Do you have any other thoughts on this? Because at the end of the day, like with everything I saw and just the feel of it, and we're X number of months in since the last time we were in Austin, I'm feeling less confident about getting to several hundred rides by mid-year. With that said, it's still months away. And again, I feel like this is going to be a binary event that once they hit it, you know, you're going to see that those cars ramp up. And clearly they have that type of volume available to them in the market today.
The volume's there. I'll use the term that Aurora uses, that Kodiak uses, that Plus uses. Is there a safety readiness measure that we do not know about, perhaps, that Tesla's trying to hit a certain number before we do this? Or is this being done until they can say, okay, Walt, we can drop you off at your doorstep. Okay, Grayson, we can drop you off at the barbecue place. Okay, Sarah, we can drop you off at the hotel. I don't know, but I believe, and this is just an assumption, that there's some detail that we're not connecting the dots. That's whatever that detail is met or exceeded, then I just think the Band-Aid comes off and this thing goes.
But if they are trying to do that, you know, again, the way the system works is, you know, if for example, if I was going to some type of taco, you know, restaurant, and, you know, you go into the entrance and the taco store is at the left. And there was like, I don't know, like a CVS, let's call it, on the right. The car basically went over to the right rather than to the taco thing, which I gave the feedback about, you know, it not going to the right location. It's like an extra, let's call it 15 yards to walk. So not the end of the world. The way the system works is like, it's not like someone's going to map it and say, drop it here. Like, it's just, you know, more of the sentient nature of the product that they clearly need to program in order for it to go to the right spot, which should be replicatable, you know, to many more locations. And I guess the question then is like who knows how long of a time that takes? Like everything that we've heard from anyone in autonomy, I think I actually addressed this on the Kodiak call, asking Don Burnett about this, is that and not to mention the many other companies that we spoke to on this trip and before, that AI is accelerating all these things. Now, I don't know what does that mean? Like, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Like, what does it mean? But I will say that it's clear that Tesla is, you know, gonna wait until they're ready to launch this stuff. And they're not gonna push it forward just to hit these milestones that obviously continue to slip in terms of, you know, hitting certain targets for, you know, when they're fully commercial or hitting in additional markets or whatever.
I'll give you a controversial take on this, but I think some people will agree with me. They're simply waiting into whatever metric is when they're ready, and they, you know, the timelines they put out, I don't think they matter. I think there's an internal goals that they're trying to achieve, and they're going to wait for that, because the last thing that they want to do from a brand perspective, a company-wide perspective, they don't want to put a product out into the market, in my opinion, and then have a major issue, have to pull it off the streets to put it back in, because the individuals that go around and chase the cars with cameras will go nuts. So you said this before on past episodes, and I think you're 100% right, and I want to emphasize that you did say this. Tesla doesn't get enough credit for their safety culture, and I think they're operating out of an abundance of caution for a variety of metrics that we perhaps do not know.
I mean, this is not even a safety issue. It's just like, if it's a drop-off situation, that's like a business decision. Like, you want to launch a good business product as well. And again, to get to my earlier point, like the way the system's designed, like if you fix how it parks, like locations where it's parked, which by the way is an issue that Waymo has as well to a certain extent. The pace of launching new markets, hitting those 7 markets by the end of Q2 to some extent, is going to become easier. Every additional market becomes easier. We're still in this kind of teething market in Austin. I think they're beyond most of the safety case aspect of it. Again, if it's anything, they have to tweak it the other way based on the disengagement that that we experienced. But this other part, we'll see how long it takes.
We'll see how long it takes, but one thing became very clear. We were toward Giga, and we went and walked the Cybercab line. And I'll say this, I was impressed. My father-in-law said, "How was it?" I said, "Papu, you've got no idea how incredible this thing is. 3 floors, amazing." My big takeaway from walking the Cybercab line, Walt, they are clearly building to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, that Giga Texas the factory there is just massive. The number of people that they're employing there, massive, right? That parking lot was teeming. Just a great, I think, overall experience to see it up front. But on the why itself, look, most people know this already, but there is a clear goal here. Make a cheaper and more durable car that can drive hundreds of thousands of miles and that can drive the cost down to create a business model. And there was, we saw what the lines were. It looks like they should be on track for the April timeline. Let's keep in mind, it's going to take, the line gets turned on and then it takes the time to ramp it up. That's how manufacturing lines, whether you're making cell phones or cars, like that is how it works. It's probably going to take over a year to ramp it to its full capacity. But then beyond that, we literally saw areas and opportunities where additional machinery was going to be going to add additional lines and to really ramp up that Cybercab volume even further. So it was great to see kind of the mechanics on how that's all coming together.
I said this before, and I'll say this again. I was blown away impressed. And we talk a lot about the factory integration and building the vehicles, but what we saw emphasized that Tesla wants to make this into a business, into a profitable business. And perhaps their manufacturing capabilities, which, as I said, I'll say again, were impressive, becomes a massive competitive edge as they scale.
And the technology that they're using to lighten the car, some of the stuff that we saw is kind of pretty amazing, including the wireless charging aspect, where you have that port in the back where currently it'll plug in, but then you'll have the wireless where the car pulls over and charges that way, which is something I'm familiar with, again, which I said in a past podcast from Witricity. I'm not sure what Tesla is using, probably their own tech, but certainly, interesting. I don't know, there's going to have to be another infrastructure investment, right? Because if you don't have a plug-in, then you can't go to all these Tesla charging stations and plug in the Cybercab. So there will be some infrastructure required there. My impression of that was the first time I was able to actually get in a Cybercab. I thought overall, though, it was, it's a small car. I'm a big guy. I am typically going to prefer the Model Ys that are available to me. Just like I'm not getting Uber X's. I'm not getting into some Honda in terms of the size and my comfort level. But in terms of the economics of the business, getting something cheap, like every single part of that car, which we literally saw as it was unboxed, I guess. And by the way, the cameras with cleaners on them, as we've seen with these new Models Ys, as an example, very well thought out for a mass rideshare market, and that is really what they're targeting.
The good news on the wireless charging, it's SAE standard J2954. It's a global standard that's being adopted. Hypothetically, and this is hypothetically, the Tesla can go on any charging pad because it all meets a global standard. The great news for the entire industry that is going to go wireless charging, the days of the J plug versus the next plug are over. On day one, everybody's agreed, so there's a clear path to scale that there. And for example, Zoox is going to use the same standard when they build their charging infrastructure out. On the Cybercab, the other thing, when we got to see the unbox, if you want to call it the teardown, that I want to highlight to the audience, this thing is a cocoon of safety. This thing was built for a horrendous situation to make sure you walk out alive. It was impressive. There's no other way to say it. It's just absolutely impressive.
So just one other thing I want to throw out there is just, this thing doesn't have a steering wheel. And even this stuff that they're making, there's probably, a minority of them that have steering wheels. We saw them on the roads of Austin, driving around. The vast majority are not going to have a steering wheel. And maybe this is where you can fill in with listing off the specific codes and regulations. But you can make, I think it's 2,500 of them. Zoox, which also, as you probably all know, does not have a steering wheel or pedals. So it has the same type of issues that they're getting through. We fully expect that those issues will be resolved. And frankly, Zoox can do Tesla a big favor by being on the bleeding edge of getting that. I guess would it be an exception? Why don't you explain to us what the rules are, Grayson?
So it's going to be an exemption. And I just want to point out for this audience that's actively on X, I know a lot of you are, there is a viral post going around X today because an individual took a picture from inside of the Cybercab that showed an FMVSS certification sticker in there. That is self-certification. That is not a US DOT approval, as Walt clearly stated. As of today, the way the law is written, you can apply for an exemption for 2,500 vehicles without a steering wheel or pedals on public roads, which we'll get to a little bit later. Secretary Duffy and Administrator Morris made remarks this week about removing that process and moving to a period where you no longer have a human driver. So as of today, Tesla can file for an FMVSS exemption for 2,500 vehicles. Then, if they would want to charge, they would have to file for a Part 555 exemption to be able to charge. When the secretary and the administrator roll out the new rules and they are adopted, that will go away. What those rules look like, we don't know, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But as of today, 2,500 vehicles when you get the exemption. Long-winded way of saying it, Walt, but there you have it.
Yeah, that was long-winded. Did Brandon Ross take over this? My friend over at Lightshed take over? That was a really long explanation for a small point for what is a long podcast for us today, Grayson. So our listeners, if you just sped your listening speed up to 1.7, you can come back down to 1.3 or whatever it is. But thank you for those details, Grayson. Can we now move on to Waymo? That does not get a clappy hat.
Okay, fine. So then I'll just put on there. So I was thinking about in the memory of Elizabeth Reed. So I could have went on for 30 minutes like the Almond Jam does.
Exactly. That felt like a definitely like a dead jam that went on forever. Anyway, so we also, when we were in Austin, did try to get a Waymo. Uber kept matching us with human drivers. I mean, I actually ended up tweeting about this, got a lot of feedback of people agreeing. That Uber needs to add an autonomous level. I mean, and it also, the timing of this was like, I'm sitting there trying to get a Waymo, doing the Uber Comfort Electric, whatever it is. And then I see these headlines come across my Bloomberg about Uber's new tier, Uber Elite, which is something over whatever their highest level is, and you can pick it up, blah, blah, blah. It's another way to make money. And I'm like, I don't need Uber Elite. I need Uber Autonomy. So I got a lot of positive feedback, but our friend Harry Campbell, the rideshare guy, he tweeted at me the following. That would go against Uber's long-term value proposition. They always have a car available and shoot for a 3 to 5 minute ETA in tier 1 cities. I could see this in the future, though, when they have much more AV supply. I mean, I get what he's saying. I appreciate that. And we know that, the relationship, in fact, with Waymo is probably not great because of this kind of obsession with 3 to 5 minute, which everyone knows that when they try and get an Uber, it says 4 minutes and then we'll see how long it actually comes. But that's beside the point. When I go in the Uber app, Harry, I have 10 different options. And if it says, let's say I wanted like a large SUV or a high-end SUV, a lot of times it says 10 or 12 minutes. And maybe the Uber X is 3 minutes. And then I, as the consumer, can make the choice. If I want that Uber Electric, if I want the Uber 10 minutes, if I'm a female and I want the female driver, which in this case, there are some parallels in terms of why you might want autonomy for safety, then let me make the choice. And it exists today. Every option in that Uber app does not say 3 to 5 minutes. Do I need to start sending screenshots about this? So why is it that you can't add one more? You can add Uber Elite and God knows however many categories. What's the deal here, Grayson? Why are we not getting an autonomous category in Austin and I guess in Atlanta, in the other place where you can only get a Waymo when you're using the Uber app as opposed to a Waymo app?
Uber's based in California. So originally when Uber launched and they rolled X out, they wanted to be In-N-Out Burger, basically 3 choices. Now it's a McDonald's menu. It's got choices for everybody. I was going back and forth months ago on X with Andrew McDonald, Mac, their COO, and he said to me that it's coming. Okay, so where does it show up, Walt? In Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So it's not technical. I don't want to hear that excuse anymore. You can have the tier available in Abu Dhabi. You can have the tier available in Dubai, but yet you can't have it in America. So that's a question there. So it's not clearly technical. And if somebody like me and somebody like you and a lot of our audience, they want to just order an autonomous vehicle. Is this Uber saying, nope, we can't do that in America because of the drivers and we might have a rebellion from the drivers? To me, it seems that this is a driver issue, not a technical issue, because as I said, it's being done overseas.
There's just no logical answer for this. There really isn't. And again, like you have things like Uber Share, where the whole point of Uber Share is like, I'll wait longer for lower price. Maybe some people want to wait longer for safety, reliability, consistency. Like there's just, I've yet to hear an argument where this makes sense. So let's not repeat ourselves. My wife gives me a hard time if I ever repeat myself. Let's move on to the next thing in terms of Uber. So I would consider that, by the way, like it's been long enough now. Uber, like enough. Just put the autonomous stack in there. In the meantime, Uber did have a lot of press releases out in autonomy. Obviously, this is a major focus of the company to continue to sign up and push forward with existing relationships to get on their apps. So we had a bunch of releases that came out this week, Wayve, Motional, and we'll get to Zoox. That's the bigger one. A lot of people, we had a group on the trip. They were joking is there coincidences? Because Tesla's doing these investor trips and at the same time, we're seeing a bunch of Uber announcement. I know, Grayson, you say there are no coincidences. What did you make of all these releases coming out of Uber? This is just I think maybe Uber's par for the course right now.
Perhaps. We don't know. But this is a hunch. And I think I got a good chance of being proven right on this. Waymo's got a major announcement coming. That's what this says to me. Perhaps Waymo's got a major announcement. I'll go out on a limb. Is it Toyota? Or it's got to be something big.
I mean, that makes a lot more sense because I doubt that Lightshed would trigger Uber to make announcements or whatever other trips are existing here or Texas or the Valley. But look, we're going to get to the one that moved Uber stock the most, which was the deal with Amazon Zoox. But there were other announcements. Let's start with the first one, which was Wayve, where they're going to launch the Nissan Leaf robotaxis with Uber and obviously Nissan in Japan by late 2026. The service is going to have safety drivers, no timeline for removing the safety drivers. What was your thought of this announcement? This also comes on the heel of what we talked about last week when I was in London and I couldn't find a Wayve anywhere. So maybe some positive signal finally on things happening at Wayve.
I'm going to ask a question, and I don't know the answer to this. In the audience, feel free to put it in the comments. I'd like to know this. Does Uber have a taxi license in Japan? And if not, who is going to be the taxi operator for this? Because you have to have a taxi license to operate in it. Positive step for Wayve, backward step for Uber, safety drivers. Waymo has set the table stakes. You launch your market, you launch without safety drivers and safety attendants. If you want to call it's the Waymo standard. Positive for Wayve for getting into a market. For Uber, it says, okay, wait, we're behind. We're partner. We have or had a partner who's obviously not expanding with you that has no safety drivers. And now we're going back to safety drivers. And you're going to see this narrative continue as we break these announcements down.
I mean, am I wrong in that wasn't the Wayve business model more about like, let's license to a manufacturer so that people can privately own cars, whether it's level 2 to level 4 to ultimately autonomous driving, and like how does Uber really play into this? I mean, I know they have their relationship, but is Wayve like pivoting now in terms of how their business model is working?
We'll get into another announcement from Wayve later, which goes to their core. What we know today is that Wayve is a licensing technology, but this Uber press release was extreme light. We don't know who's going to own the asset. We don't know how the economics are going to work. We don't know, is Wayve licensing it to Nissan and then Nissan's going to own the asset and put it on Uber? We don't know. What we do know is that there is a contractual agreement between Wayve and Nissan to integrate for the Pro Pilot 2 for an ADAS system. But this is the first news on an L4 system. It's just, you read these press releases and they're unfortunately, very light on details. And I'm going to keep asking questions until I get answers.
Again, like you want companies to talk about what they're doing in autonomy, like, and provide milestone steps. Would you rather them not issue a press release? So it's fine, I think, for press releases to not have all the details, just to show like that these companies are active. That's what press releases are about.
But okay, so now I'm going to put on my annoying hat. Memorandum of understanding. A memorandum of understanding is a lot easier to break than a contract.
I mean, I hear you on that. I hear you on that. So get something signed. That's true. That's fair. But look, Waymo did the same thing with that, whatever they had with Toyota in the past, which we've heard nothing about since. The other announcement that Uber made was with Motional. I guess they launched, I don't know whether it was today or yesterday, but this week, let's call it, in Las Vegas. I mean, unfortunate that we couldn't get an emotional car in Vegas only 3 months ago, but congrats, I guess, on launching. I'm not sure I can fly out to Vegas. So any of our listeners in Vegas, please hop in and tell us what your experience. Once again, available on UberX electric and comfort tiers. So good luck in trying to get one of those things. I don't know, how many do you think they have in the market? And is it going to be what we experienced in Austin, where there's clearly hundreds of Waymos and still, for whatever reason, hard to get a Waymo assigned to us when we were selecting comfort tiers?
If you look historically, when the joint venture between Hyundai and Aptiv was at its full strength, I would estimate when they hosted us, it was probably a couple hundred vehicles. After the joint venture and Hyundai became the primary owner, I'm going to go and say sub 100 vehicles in the entire fleet. Probably, I'll give you a ballpark estimate, 25 to 35 that they're going to operate in this Robotaxi. But again, safety drivers. And you can only go to limited locations, Resorts World, Encore, Westgate. So you're at that north end of the strip and you can't go very many places there. The goal that they stated in the press release was to go driver out by the end of the year, but this feels like it's another Zoox-like Vegas launch.
All right, that sounds a lot like Zoox. If you're just talking about point-to-point locations where I can't, get in one of these things and go wherever I want to on the Vegas Strip. I mean, is it just that they've mapped out certain routes? I mean, this sounds more like glideways than it does like a true autonomous service.
It does, and it goes back to your tier again. You don't have the ability to pick the tier to get autonomous vehicles. It seems that Motional is obviously working very hard with Hyundai to revamp the program, to bring it back and scale a Robotaxi service. But it seems to me, what if they waited 3 or 4 months until the tech was further along and they had more vehicles, then rolled it out?
Again, the bottom line is it's another company that's developing technology. Uber's helping, I guess, demand. But in this case, I don't even know if they would have needed Uber to generate enough demand to get the miles that they needed, even if ultimately that was going to be their distribution. But you've got Wayve, you've got Motional, you got Zoox. I mean, the 10,000-foot question before we get to talking about Zoox is, if you're like one of 7 players on the platform, are you getting enough volume to actually generate a business model that can generate you a profit? Like, even if the vast majority of the miles go autonomous, which we believe it is does anyone think or believe that, 5 years from now that there's going to be 6 or 7 autonomous types of vehicles going on there? I don't know. I think it's maybe possible, but does that seem likely?
At the rate it's going today, it seems like Uber's going to take anybody. You can have Walt autonomy and they'll put it on there the way that they're going. That's what it seems like to me. But if I put my consistency hat on, it's an inconsistent experience. And we know at some point this year, we do not have a date, but we do know, because Waymo has put a blog post out and an X post, Waymo is launching in Las Vegas, not on Uber. That's going to be a really interesting statistic to see where consumers gravitate towards. So they want the consistent experience. Am I right in that? Or do they want whatever I'm going to get? That's going to be really interesting to see as that rolls out.
Well, they're going to gravitate to a car that can actually take them to more than 3 or 4 destinations, I suppose. That will probably be a key factor. I don't know. I just don't know. I'd have to think about it more in terms of the economics, but I just feel like the amount of money that's going into each of these individual companies, if they're all effectively relying on Robotaxi, as opposed to the business model I referred to earlier, where Wayve would license it and build a business model that way. If you're fragmented on a guy who themselves, Uber, may only have a percentage of the market, because maybe Waymo and Tesla have another slice of the market is the, share of share that you're going to get enough to generate enough miles to pay back your investors and to get to positive. I mean, we'll have to look at that map. The bull thesis would be, again, miles are going to be so huge that if rideshare miles are 1% of total miles driven going to 30%, let's call it, even if Uber's share goes from whatever it is, 80% down to 20%, that's still huge. But then if you're the autonomous guy in there, you're a fraction of the 20% that Uber has. And then does your, let's call it 10% of 20%, your 2% of that market, is that enough to have these companies survive?
You're right. It's something that we're going to have to watch. And as our audience knows, and we know, it costs billions of dollars to build the autonomous driving technology. And Zoox has spent billions building their autonomous driving technology. I call it the toaster. I think they believe they call it the carriage. And this week they announced a partnership with Uber where, lo and behold, the go it alone is not happening anymore. Zoox vehicles are going to be available in Las Vegas on the Uber app, and next year, late next year, in Los Angeles on the Uber app. Interesting caveat here in the fine print. They'll be available also on the Zoox app. But nevertheless, very interesting. Did not see this deal coming.
Yeah, and it obviously moved Uber's stock several percentage points on this. So people pay more attention to this, versus Wayve or Motional because it's owned by Amazon, right? And you mentioned the billions they've already spent. And Amazon has the ability to spend billions more. Now, early in the year, both of us, and I've actually made this on the Lightshed side of prediction, assumed that there was going to be some restructuring in there. Maybe that they bought some additional autonomy technology to try and advance something that hasn't been great. I mean, we were both in this Zoox at CES more recently, and then even prior to that, it hasn't, in my mind, just based on my personal experience with it, really been progressing. There was limited stops, as we just talked about with what Motional is going to be doing. It's like a windowless situation. It was like nauseating in terms of the herky jerkiness of it that existed, and we saw several breaking down. So, like, if anything, we were more worried about or concerned about, what Zoox's next step. And then on top of that, like, the CEO of this company, which has been around for a while, has been vociferous in not doing a deal with Uber or any type of platform company. And why don't you, for our listeners who may not know this, review some of the past comments by Zoox CEO about doing a partnership, which they just did with Uber.
So we're going to run the gauntlet here and running through some quotes that Aisha Evans, the CEO of Zoox, has made in public forums, and we're going to source those public forums for you. In March 2021, on the Verge Decoder podcast, Ms. Evans stated the following in quote, "To give the rider the experience we want, we have to own the end-to-end. If you're using someone else's app, you're a commodity. We aren't building a taxi, we're building a service. That service lives in our app." Well, and we got more here. December 2022 on the Graylock podcast, Ms. Evans stated the following in quote, "If you wait until you need to scale to actually build the infrastructure, the app and the customer interface, you've already lost." December 2023 at the Stanford Business School View from the Top podcast, Ms. Evans stated the following in quote, "We are not a component provider. We are not a software provider for someone else's fleet. We're a full stack service. The moment you split the app from the vehicle, you lose the ability to guarantee the safety and the magic of the ride." November 2025, Washington Post Live, Ms. Evans said the following, end quote, "We are building the vehicle, the AI, and the service. When you control the entire stack, you aren't just giving someone a nice ride. You're providing an environment. Our app is the gateway to that environment. We don't want to be a feature in someone else's platform. We want to be the platform." And that brings us to this week, Walt, March 2026, and the Uber press release announcing the deal. Ms. Evans stated the following, end quote, "This partnership is an opportunity to continue advancing the use of autonomous mobility in daily life. Through our collaboration, Zoox will provide a differentiated rider experience to those who already know and love the convenience of riding with Uber. End quote. What happened?
Well, it was definitely differentiated when I was when I was using it in Las Vegas to the point where I didn't feel so well. But I mean, look, hopefully the next time she is interviewed, someone's going to ask her the tough question. We invite anyone from Zoox to come on Autonomy Markets on the road to autonomy and try and square up what happened from November 25th or November, excuse me, of 2025 to March of 26 in terms of not being on a platform. On one hand, you could say like maybe this is just a short-term thing and they're going to go back to that. We'll have to wait to hear what their comments are. On another hand, maybe this is reflective of what she said back in 22, which they've lost, which goes back to the prediction I had that they need some restructuring. And this is like, hey, I'm the CEO of the subsidiary. Someone finally made the call, like, what is going on? And, you do this deal with Uber. The problem with that is like, while it provides some validation that Uber goes in there, although Uber seemingly does deals with everybody, there is clearly some validation. That doesn't change the fact, it doesn't make the product work better. The fact that I've created demand doesn't change the fact that it's going to a limited number of locations and they're having, technical difficulties. And from Uber's standpoint, like, yeah, I get it. I get why investors are excited because it's Amazon in one hand. And maybe it's like some indication that, well, if Amazon, this big company, flipped and said, like, we can't do it on our own, then that is the inevitability of Google with Waymo. That Waymo at some point will even if they, and by the way, Waymo never said all these things that Zoox has said about not wanting to be the complete stack. They have never said that, right? They're just testing all these different things. But maybe people think that like now Waymo is going to shift. Zoox and Waymo are miles apart in terms of what are the decision factors that would decide what strategic decision they have to make. Given the 3,000, Waymos that are in the market with only 70, remote safety drivers, millions and millions of miles, and stuff that we've ridden in and other people, thousands of people have ridden in and can feel what a true autonomous quality ride feels like versus what Zoox is delivering in the market today.
Waymo is the global benchmark for autonomous driving technology. You are right about what you said about that. And furthermore, Waymo is generating revenue. The vehicles are driving millions of miles, generating revenue. Zoox has yet to generate one single dollar from a commercial ride. If you want to know why, they don't have the Part 555 exemption. The rides in Vegas are free. Waymo, you could do the simple math, I'll make it very simple for you, has generated more than $1. And they've generated a lot more than $1. Zoox hasn't generated any dollars. And I saw headlines across the terminal, across this. Uber has their new Waymo. No, I'm sorry, headlines. This is not their new Waymo. This is another pure autonomous vehicle partner in their overarching let's fragment the market strategy.
But who could be the new Waymo for them is Nuro. Nuro's got a path to thousands of cars. They've got a partnership with another company that really needs this to work in Lucid. Lucid had an investor day where they're showing new products that are replicating, what Tesla is doing, with the Cybercab. Like that's the stuff to fundamentally, I think, get excited about. But look, it is what it is, right? All we can do is share with you our experiences. We get in most of these cars. Like I said, we were just in the Tesla unsupervised car. We've been in Zoox, we've been in a lot of these things. So we'll see which develops. And again, I still from backing up, like I'm still fine with the press release. I think you want to continue to push this industry forward. But at some point, and we saw this a little bit with NVIDIA, like doing deals, and like getting up on stage with Jensen is always positive. So at some point then investors do say, okay, what actually happens in terms of volume? What does it generate in terms of profitability for these autonomous companies? Can that get them to raise the next capital? Can that fund the next 30,000 cars? And we've got different proof points on that, and in terms of which companies are perhaps doing better or worse. But certainly great to see a lot of news coming out of Uber this week.
I want to go back to what you said about Lucid. It's very interesting. The company, as you mentioned, had their investor day and they announced a mid-sized vehicle. We do not have a rendering of that. And they also announced the Lunar Robotaxi. What was interesting about that, there's a lot of interesting things. One, it's a two-seater. And I'm going to take my creative artistic here and say it looks very similar to Cybercab. Yes, I know it's different, but the design factor looks different. It also looks similar to the Vern. So this will be the third, if produced and manufactured, will be the third Robotaxi with two seaters. And with the inspector hat on, I noticed something very interesting. There was a photo of the interim CEO, Mark, of Lucid, and Andrew McDonald, COO of Uber, posing for a press photo. What I was missing from that? Jay-Z, Dave Ferguson, Andrew Chapman, none of the Neuro executives were in that photo. Matter of fact, I didn't see any autonomy executives photographed in any of those press photos put out. Very interesting.
I guess so, but I guess we'll find out more over time. Lucid, there's a limited number of resources. So if you're speculating that Lucid is going to bring in additional autonomy partners dealing with maybe NVIDIA on their own, I'll be skeptical. Let's get the Neuro relationship going and cranking out some cars, and I think that will obviously expand the opportunity for Neuro to be their technology partner.
Well, and I have to go on the speculation because also they at Lucid Investor Day they announced a personally owned Lucid vehicle. We do not know the body frame, we don't know the design. 2029. No announcement of who's going to power that. However, Lucid did announce that they are building an in-house autonomy program. So that's something interesting to watch.
It is. And obviously Rivian has got something similar. And again, you're just adding to the numbers of companies that are out there that are developing autonomy. And even with the help of Uber creating demand for them, and even with an expanding market, is it going to create demand for 5, 7, 10, whatever the number is, of people to generate revenue to sustain that business model?
And that's something we clearly don't know. But you want to know what's really interesting this week, staying on the business model standpoint, we got to go back to Wayve. Wayve announced a partnership with Qualcomm where the Wayve driver is going to be embedded on the Snapdragon chip, sold directly to OEMs. It's an L2 system, but it's very interesting that an OEM that has a Qualcomm relationship could buy that technology directly from Qualcomm. That's very interesting this week.
I mean, sure, it's interesting. It's talk, it's narrative. It gets back to the earlier thing, like why are they bothering with the whole Robotaxi stuff for, unknown numbers of volumes? This is more consistent with, I thought, what the narrative was. So we'll see. It's good to partner with multiple vendors that are out there in order to try and get adoption of your technology. It's also odd because isn't NVIDIA an investor in Wayve?
Yes, and that's what I found very odd because in the fine print of the announcement, they clearly stated and publicly stated that they are going to pursue level 4 together. But if you watch Jensen, L4 is his jam, so that's interesting.
So Grayson, we split some duties this week. I did some work on the trucking guys out in Dallas, which I'll get to in a second. But you spent some time, understanding what was going on at this big event that was held in DC from the Department of Transportation. Tell us more about that.
It was great. Secretary Duffy and Minister Morrison hosted a group of individuals, including the CEO of Zoox, Aurora, and the co-CEO of Waymo at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where they announced some pretty big things. Secretary Duffy announced that the department is working on autonomous vehicle 3.0 guidance, which for the audience, very simply, that is going to pave the way forward for the adoption and acceleration of autonomous vehicles in America. Very bullish for the industry. NHTSA announced that they're implementing a 3-pillar strategy of prioritizing the safety of ongoing road operations. And here's the kicker, Walt, removing outdated regulatory barriers to allow the commercial scaling of autonomous vehicles. What does that mean in hindsight? NHTSA has come to the conclusion when you operate an autonomous vehicle, you don't need windshield wipers, you do not need side view mirrors, and you do not need pedals or steering wheel. For the audience, that's not policy wonks. It's required by law today. So thank you, Minister Morrison, for moving that forward. So there's a very clear desire coming from the federal government, Secretary Duffy and Administrator Morrison, of moving America forward on autonomy. And in his opening remarks, Secretary Duffy, Secretary of Transportation, said something very interesting, which I want to read here for you, Walt. And quote, this is from Secretary Duffy. American technology must come first around the world. This is not only about the economics, it's about national security. The autonomous vehicle race is one we must win. I want to see the technology developed in America. I want the rest of the world to use American technology. I do not want a foreign competitor, a foreign adversary, or the Chinese Communist Party to beat us in this race. This is a national security issue. This is an economic issue, and this is a safety issue. That's a big statement that goes a lot into what we talk about from the secretary.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this issue on a variety of fronts. One is the Zeekers that Waymo is about to start ramping up volumes on. Another is, Uber's relationship and driving Chinese vendors outside of the U.S. and an American company helping them do that. So we'll see how much this kind of rhetoric gets stepped up in action that can impact some of these things that are out there. There's obviously other AV startups that we've talked to that, we suspect have a lot of technology from China as well. And I think that, it's likely that someone like Duffy and Secretary Duffy and others within the administration, could spend some more time taking a look at this and guiding a path that's going to be positive for U.S. companies to succeed in this AV race. And, look, we're both super bullish on autonomy, and it's the physical manifestation of AI. And I've seen this happen before in terms of 5G and how the government can get active.
And you've seen a lot of things. You were in Dallas. What did you see when you met with the trucking companies?
I mean, it was great. We spent some time with Torque, Kodiak, and Bot Auto. There's others that are there that we weren't able to schedule time with. Rode in a Kodiak truck, which is a Class 8. It had the whole, trailer on it. I don't know all the exact terms of the trucking industry, but I had been in those trucks before. It definitely felt better in terms of the ride itself. And last time I had, there was I think the driver had taken control at one point. This time was a much longer ride in Texas in this area. This is a major trucking lane, so it was more, I think, realistic than maybe what I experienced in California. Also saw the operations that they're doing there. So really got a sense of how the trucking and continue to get a better sense of how this trucking industry is going to work. We're going to spend more time back in Fort Worth at Forward Fort Worth with Hillwood to spend more time with this. I'm personally, again, open to it. I know that a lot of the existing autonomy companies believe that integration with the OEMs is important. I'm increasingly not in that camp. in that the OEMs, maybe long term, but in the near term, and there's demonstrable evidence of this, that the OEMs have slowed down the development of some of these autonomous companies, and it's been more of a liability. And then you see what Kodiak does in terms of making it modular, where they take these sensors, not on the top of the truck, but they clunk them on the side, and you can change whatever tractor trailer or whatever you're called, the cab that they put it on, whether it's a Packard or a Volvo or whatever, military truck or whatever, to broaden out. Now, it's not coming off the line, but when you make it that modular, you can crank out a fair amount of trucks to try and ramp the revenue. We also like spending time in their center. When you see it on the map and you see this route from Dallas to Atlanta, which is 800 miles. I think a truck with gas obviously can get you over 1,000 miles. But the problem with humans is because of how regulations work and the number of hours that they allow a trucker, thankfully, to drive before they're required to take some sleep. And this is beyond Kodiak, and this is anyone, whether it's Aurora or Bot Auto or Plus or whoever, Torque. You're having to have two humans, which we already have a labor shortage on, in those cabs. So the revenue, so the cost of those miles goes up prohibitively. So you've got these routes, these lanes as they call them, that are low-hanging fruit where there's an opportunity. And frankly, this market, I think, is more easily fragmentable between some of these the trucking guys that are out there. There is an opportunity, and a revenue opportunity for all of them. I just think that I'm increasingly of the belief that you can't let these OEMs hold you back. You need to move. And look, Aurora has already made that pivot, going to Roush and doing upfitting themselves. That it just feels like it's a bit more of a liability than anything. Well, I also saw with Bot Auto how if you're the carrier themselves, like again in the early days, it's not necessarily scalable, but there's a situation like you get a low cost lot somewhere, you have this autonomous truck pull into this lot where you're not paying a lot of money for, you have the human driver come in, unhitch the cab, like because that person's local, they're not driving the 200 miles, unhitch the cab, right? Or the autonomous thing, that thing goes back autonomously to whatever, pick up the next haul or maybe take something else there, and then that human drives it to the final destination. This is not, because I think people have criticized maybe Aurora for, oh, do you have to build this big infrastructure? I saw it firsthand. It doesn't have to be a massive, expensive infrastructure to get those early signs of revenue ramp, for some of these trucking things to work. So I think there's some opportunities. Now, how customers pay for this, for these trucking things? Do they pay, does UPS, Amazon, FedEx, are they going to pay a super high price for it? Are they going to pay residuals? Those things are going to, will figure themselves out. Like, so if one company tells you I'm going to get a big residual, and another company tells you, no, I'm going to charge a lot for the car, like the customer will ultimately determine that. There's a lot of different ways to generate revenue, and you can always switch that. It always goes back to the technology. And again, I think, to move the technology forward, you need to kind of put the OEMs behind you, get it out there, ramp the revenue, and then put pressure on the OEMs to come back to you in a panic to say, like, how do we integrate you? How do we give you this redundancy and crank this stuff off the line? Make them scared that if they don't do something with you, that they're going to be lost and they're going to lose out on truck sales in the future.
And we're looking forward to meeting with more autonomous trucking companies in 2 weeks when we're attending Ford Fort Worth. So Ian, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to moderating the panel, The Business of Autonomous Trucking. So looking forward to that, which brings us to the foreign autonomy desk this week. We had some news out of Japan. Nuro has begun testing in Tokyo as they prepare for their global expansion. Pony AI has expanded their relationship with Tencent in China, so now available through the Tencent app. Interesting fact here, in China on the mainland, over 1 billion people have downloaded the Tencent app. Geely is producing 2,000 bespoke robotaxis for WeRide, so that relationship continues, which brings us to next week. We covered a lot this week. What's on the docket for next week? Or perhaps, are we going to get a giant Waymo announcement? Was this the precursor for it?
I don't know. It could be another good week for Uber because NVIDIA GTC starts, and so they're going to push, their autonomy stack. I suppose that'll be part of some of the comments, some of the presentation, and to the extent that investors believe that NVIDIA can commoditize the market through their own autonomy, that is perceived positively for Uber. So that starts on Monday, and we'll see what type of comments and announcements that they will make over the course of the week. On the opposite side, you have South by Southwest. Tesla, obviously is in that market in Austin. So for better or worse, you're going to see more posts. Maybe you're going to have, it'll be bad, positive for Uber, bad for Tesla if people have situations where they have to call back and get out of a tight situation that the car's not operating. Or maybe you'll see a bunch of, posts that'll be unsupervised like we experienced, and everyone's gonna be like, oh shit, like here comes Tesla. So who knows? You never know with Tesla what you're gonna get in terms of the news flow. You kind of know what you're going to get with NVIDIA, and I don't know, Uber's been on a press release, they must be running out of ink on the printer. So I expect 2 or 3 more press releases out of Uber, especially if it's during NVIDIA week.
Watch for that. The one thing that I'm watching for, and this is pure speculation, does NVIDIA at GTC open source an autonomous driving stack and contractually tie it to NVIDIA chips? I say that because they've done that with several versions for physical AI where they open source it, but you must use their chips. That's something to watch because that could be a potential game changer. And each and every week, Walt and I will be here breaking down the autonomy markets. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is in autonomous business. Walt, until next week.